Hello, my name is Janine Payne, and I am joined by Cheryl Thompson. We are the co directors of the Institute for the Advancement of Women's Health, IAWH. Today, we are absolutely thrilled for this gift to have a conversation with one of the nation's most prolific writers, Marita Golden. Marita Golden is an American novelist, nonfiction writer, professor, and co founder of the Hurston Wright Foundation. It's a national organization that serves as a resource center for African American writers. A native of Washington, D.C., she received a BA degree in American Studies and English from American University and an MSc in journalism from Columbia University. The Strong Black Woman: How the Myth Endangers the Physical and Mental Health of Black Women is what brings us together today. This book is gold to anyone who wants to understand the social determinants of public health.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I'd like to get the conversation started with an opening question. And this is more of a conversation than a formal interview, so we may bounce around a little bit. So right off, sometimes we revel in the concept of the strong Black woman. It's somehow both a badge of accomplishment and Black womanhood, but we also know that the same thing that is the strong Black woman concept is killing us. Why do we perpetuate it?
Well, I think that we are now at a watershed moment, historically and culturally. For many, many generations, the strong Black woman syndrome, complex belief, has been a bedrock of our community's way of surviving in a racist society. And for our grandmothers and mothers, the belief in our strength and our invincibility was really important as we dealt with very often, for example, being the primary breadwinners, having to take on disproportionate leadership roles in our community, sexism and racism, and knowing that our vulnerabilities, our frailties were marginalized, erased, and unheard. And so moving past the pain, moving past the horror of our experience was in many respects a normal survival technique. But we now live in a world where, because of feminism, the civil rights movement, and Oprah Winfrey, we've brought everything out of the closet. And many of the cultural and psychological inheritances that as a culture and as a larger society, we activate, we act on, are now being dismantled and interrogated. So when I look back on my mother telling me, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, you're gonna have to be 3 times as good, she was responding to the realities of the world that she lived in. And she had no idea that that belief system was toxic. It was only strong. It was only enabling. But now we live in a world where we can look at that belief system and see the dark side of it. So we are now, I consider me and you two part of a growing army of women who are enrolled in the project of changing the definition of what we mean by strength for Black women. And it's a generational project.
And, thank you for that. Thank you. And you're absolutely right. It's been a method of survival for us. But, now, particularly with this book, that not only, there's been a lot of research around this superwoman schema and other areas. And I think you wrote an essence about the superwoman, I think, a while back, or at least there maybe was an article. But very rarely do you see or find a book that addresses both the strong Black woman and that myth, as you've written, as well as the mental and physical effects. Research, in academia, we, focus just more on the research, which is also very important. But it is just amazing the way that you've been able to pull the two together and provide really a handbook, given how impactful this book is to our community. I can see these as one women stories on Broadway. So I have to ask, is there any plans for how these stories can be, is you thinking of perhaps developing them in some way?
Well, I'd love to think that this book was going to be an HBO special documentary or
No.
whatever. But I have worked on a workbook. I'm putting the finishing touches on
Great.
a workbook tentatively titled The Soul of a New Age Strong Black Woman, Healing Mind, Body, Spirit. Because I got a lot of questions about my practices for self-care, my practices around health. And so I thought it would be helpful to write a book that talked about what practices I use. And also it's designed as a book that's almost like a journal or diary, where I ask these crucial, critical questions for people to think about and write in response to. So the book becomes kind of a way that they can develop an action plan to
Yes.
either create positive self-care practices or enhance the ones that they already have.
Thank
I
you.
can't wait for that.
Oh, I can't wait for it. And so that you know, Ms. Golden, that would be a workbook that we at IAWH could then utilize and use as a tool with women. You know, maybe a monthly, you know, I don't want to start digging down, but so many ways, as you can imagine, how that can be utilized. So excuse me, Cheryl, go ahead. You got it.
Yeah, so just keeping the conversation going, I noticed like right off the bat, you started talking about the physical impact of being the strong Black woman. You even talked about being shocked when your doctor told you that you had suffered many strokes and you weren't aware of it. And even though you kept, you were diligent about your health, your diet, and self-care, and you mentioned Black don't crack, but our bodies do. Our bodies do crack. And I was so glad to see that you spent time talking about all of the chronic conditions that we talk about in the public health world, and how obesity plays a role, and overweight and obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and stress, all related to this concept of the strong Black woman. Do you think that by now, Black women are getting the message that connecting the way that we're living with our health outcome? Are we getting the message, or are we still on that
I think
road?
we are. I think younger Black women, there's a
Okay.
generational divide. I think younger Black women are certainly more likely to seek out mental professional care. In our family, for example, on both sides, my husband's and my side, the younger women in our family do seek out therapy if they need it, and they seek out therapy for their children. So in doing research for the book, I did find that there's kind of a generational divide, but there's still deep pockets in our community where mental health, the realization that you need mental health care is still stigmatized. I mean, I know did a program with one woman, and she said that when she went to see a therapist, her family's deeply religious, and they just really were deeply upset, and they called a family meeting and they prayed for her and they laid hands on her, because she had gone to a therapist. And yet there are women in the book, The Strong Black Woman, who talk about essentially praying their way into therapy. So that for many of us, there is no dichotomy between seeking the healing of a belief in a higher power and knowing that that same higher power has created therapists and counselors to serve us on this earth. So we're on a journey. I mean, for example, look at COVID. Our community has been racked and is grief ridden, grief stricken, and on its knees because of what this disease has done to us. But at the same time, during COVID, many people started exercising, walking. They became very aware of their physical health and mental health. And when I talked to some of the therapists that I interviewed for the book, and I sort of checked in with them as I was finishing the book, they said that they've seen an uptick in the number of women who were coming back to therapy or women who were coming to therapy for the first time. Now, of course, this is great, but at the same time, we have a physical and mental health system in this country that's in tatters. So we're at a point where I think there is change. And I think, as I said, this is a generational shift that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so we're going to have to talk to our daughters, and they're going to have to talk to their daughters. And we're going to have to talk to our husbands and our sons and our brothers about this. This is going to have to be a normalized conversation that we begin having.
Thank you for that, because I've been thinking. I have a daughter and son. My son is eldest, and I've thought, I will have these conversations with him. He has a girlfriend and so forth, and just learning more about the Black experience. Yes, you've seen your mom, but you've also seen your mom at times perhaps not cry. You talk about that, and not that I'm so stoic, but just to introduce some new ideas as what it is to be a black woman, a black woman, and times when I really have felt somewhat either defeat, whatever it is, but also talk about the things that I'm doing for myself,
Yes.
therapy.
I mean, I think that's very important. And when I was writing that chapter, I reached out to my son and asked him if he remembered ever seeing me cry. And he said he did. And this was at a point when he was a teenager and he had made some really unfortunate decisions that had impacted him as well as the family. And he saw me cry as I worked with him to figure out how we were going to navigate this situation.
Yes.
And he said that he learned from seeing me cry that I was not a superwoman, that I was not invincible, that his decisions had consequences, and that he had to pay the price for his decisions, that I would be there for him, but I couldn't solve all of his problems. And I think that's very important for our children to know, that we hurt, that they can hurt us, and they can hurt us badly. And we're willing to express that pain even as we love them.
I remember reading that, and I was very much impacted by that. And I would like to ask, what has been the response to the Strong Black Woman from, yes, Black women? What are you hearing? But also academia, perhaps the healthcare system. Are there people talking, and other parts of the ecosystem, that touches our lives?
Well, I've been very gratified that the book is a book that, when I was writing the book, I imagined myself writing it for every individual Black woman who would read it.
Mhm.
So that when people have said, "Oh, this book touched me so much," I say, "Well, I wrote it for you. I wrote it for you, and I wrote it for you." And so that when the book came out, people were buying it by the dozens. When Christmas time came, people were like, a friend of mine came over with a dozen copies, sign these. So it's very gratifying that the response has been that enthusiastic and gratifying. I'm currently engaged in doing a virtual residency at Johns Hopkins Medical as a result of the book. And what I mean by a virtual residency is, in February, I'm talking to the staff and the faculty at all of the Johns Hopkins centers, via Zoom, in these sessions around mental and physical health. And the first session in February was a discussion of the book. And I interviewed, as part of that program, Dr. Pamela Brewer, who is featured in the book. And I just did, earlier this month, a 90-minute mental health workshop where in 90 minutes we did a meditation. I had everyone do an action plan around assessing how are they doing in terms of their spiritual health. What are they doing now? What could they do more? Setting boundaries. Why can't you say no? What are you afraid of? As well as your body. I had the participants write a letter to their body, thanking their body for whatever they wanted to thank their body for. And one woman said that she suffered with a chronic illness. And she said she just thanked her body for enduring, for just being there for her through all that she had to go through with this chronic illness. And then I had them write a letter from their bodies to them, giving them a grade on how well they had cared for their bodies. And that was a whole different thing. So, and then next month, April, I'm doing a workshop, writing through the storm, using writing as a way of healing. Because, and you see, it's not it's interesting because when I started this, when I was invited to do it, I initially thought, well, I'm going to be talking to a lot of, nurses and doctors who've seen a lot of death and grief. But the director of diversity and inclusion, who had invited me to do this, said it's not just them, Marita, it's all of us. We're all grieving. We've all lost a lot. And we, in our pre-planning session for this, on our Zoom call, we made a list of all the things that we're grieving. And it's just, if you really think about what we're grieving, it's not just losing people to COVID. It's the fear of getting COVID, the loss of normalcy, the pain we feel that our children's lives have been disrupted. The social and political turmoil has caused ruptures in family, has caused ruptures in friendship. But even as we've lost a lot, we've gained a lot too. Many of us have gained resilience and strength. Many of us have gained a new way of looking at our lives. So it's been a time that's been turmoil filled, but that has also had some hidden treasures for some of us.
You touched on so many things. I've just made some notes. First, I do remember Dr. Pamela Brewer, because she used to be on WPFW. She had a show called Mind Talk.
Exactly.
And I used to listen to that. Yeah. And also, just wondering, are you taking individual patients? Because I can sign up. I think I know who the head of diversity and inclusion is at
Dr. Sharita Golden.
Oh, okay.
We're not related.
No, but I know the name. Yeah.
So you brought up the word resilience, and Janine and I had just had a conversation about this, like maybe on Monday when we were planning for this conversation with you. And I was telling her I was beginning to have a problem with the word resilience because people throw it around and it means, that you've bounced back from something, and it's probably coming back from some kind of trauma where you've been beat up. And so I don't like that word anymore because to me it almost feels like it just doesn't feel
I think it's a perfectly fine word. The fact that the word has been overused is not the word's fault. Okay, it's not the fault of that word that we've used it too much. Okay. Like you take a word like awesome. Oh my God, that word has no meaning anymore. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So that the real meaning of awesome, meaning to fill someone with actual awe, people don't even know what that means. But I still reserve the right to use it in its most correct form. So as a writer, I don't want to get rid of any word. I just think we just need to use words more properly.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, because Cheryl and I, we went back and forth, and it's like, yeah, you feel like that you're coming back from something, but you're right. It's not, then that's not a bad thing. And it's actually a new opportunity to get it right or to be stronger, but stronger in a way that's healthy.
The part that you brought up about the journaling and the writing, that just speaks to my heart because I love just writing. It's nothing, even since I was a kid, just a blank piece of paper and a really good pen. It's all I needed. And so we've incorporated writing.
I saw that on the website.
Yeah,
I saw that.
It's meant a lot going through the pandemic and having people express how they've been feeling and dealing with grief and all of those things. So I love that. You talked about how some people are just waiting for Jesus. Jesus is going to solve everything. But how do you actually approach that kind of resistance to making change in your own life or being, having agency and being able to move from your point of difficulty forward?
Well, a lot of times, even the women who are interviewed in the book who give these deeply moving testimonies about trauma, healing, going into therapy, many of them had to have a breakdown. And we tend to feel that once we've had a breakdown, which means that we can't cope, we literally are stalled. Okay, now it's okay. Now it's okay to seek mental health. Once my family has to put me in a hospital,
Yeah.
or once I have to go to the emergency room, now I can seek therapy. But in actuality, we want to move away from, mental illness to mental health as
Mhm.
something that we practice, that mental health can be practiced. Mental health can be encouraged. Mental health can be a thing that just as you hopefully go for an annual checkup, just as you brush your teeth every day, just as you exercise,
Mhm.
mental health is something that can be woven into our lives as a positive, not a reaction to something that's very negative. And a
Mhm.
lot of times, like I've talked about my spiritual work and the fact that the most important thing I've done is to become friends with my inner Marita
Mhm.
through meditation and through spending time in silence. I have gotten used to listening to my own instincts
Yes.
Mhm.
and my own heart.
Yes.
Mhm.
And many years of doing that has strengthened me in my ability to follow my instincts, to say yes to myself and no to those things that could be harmful. And a lot of times when, we say, well, I don't know how to say no. What you don't know how to say is yes. You know how to say yes to yourself. And a lot of times there are people in your life. For example, if you have a problem
Mm.
saying no or standing up
Right.
for yourself, I'll bet money that there's some women in your life who are good at that
Yeah.
and that you can use as a mentor for a conversation. How do you do it? I want to
Mhm.
be you or whatever. So there's many, many things. But if and it's interesting when I talk to the therapists for the book, I said, what's the one thing you would say to Black women to do for their mental health? And to slow down. And by
Mm.
slow down, they meant breathe, have quiet time,
Mm.
recognize that you can have time for yourself, that you can put things off. Everything doesn't have to be done today.
Yes. Right.
And the
Love that.
doctors said, the one thing I would tell Black women is to move. We're always moving because we're always doing something. We're always solving somebody's problem. But what they mean is move in the sense of moving for exercise, moving
Mhm.
in ways that intentionally heal and strengthen your body. So those two practices, and I'm still learning how to do this. I mean, for example, let's go back to the silent strokes. Silent
Mhm.
strokes are actually very common. There are millions of people who have silent strokes, have no knowledge. Now, in my case, my mother died of a stroke and my father died of a heart attack, and I was 21 and 23. So the
Mhm.
fact that they died when I was on the cusp of adulthood shook me to my core. And I decided that I was going to be very healthy. So that in my 20s, I started doing everything right, exercise, diet, mental, all of that. So if I had not done that, those silent strokes could have been fatal. I cannot help the fact that from my mother, I have inherited a predisposition for stroke. I cannot help that from my father, I've inherited a predisposition to heart attack. I cannot help the fact that as an African American living in a systemically racist society, racism is a stress factor in my body that combines with my inherited genetic predisposition.
Mm.
But I
Right.
can exercise.
Mhm.
I can factor into my life practices that release the pressure that
Mhm.
is constantly building up. Whenever I work, particularly in historically white corporate situations, and the university is nothing but a corporation,
That's right.
I have made sure that I've had what I call a sister circle. That is other Black women who we would get together once a month and just be Black together,
Yes.
women together,
Mhm.
figure out how we were going to deal with what was going on together. And that combined with my other practices, as well as freely going to seek mental health support, has helped me to live a decade longer.
Let's not take a lot of time looking back. Let's use what we have, the tools now. And I'm not speaking, this is not novel for anyone, but let's use what we have now and to change the narrative of our family. I have a disposition, and it's interesting because your book actually reminded me, this is no kidding, that my father had a stroke, and this was in '98, and then he passed of a heart attack. He was 64. All right.
Mhm.
So what your book reminded me, Janine, and I try to, eat well. I'm on that treadmill, and now the weather's better and back outdoors. And Cheryl, she'll talk about her athleticism. But the point is changing and doing things differently. But it also reminded me, wow, and your predispositions of other diseases in your family, don't forget to talk about those. So I am going to speak to my clinician, my doctor, about the fact that my father had, stroke. And I'm just being honest, I totally forgot that, there's something in your DNA you need to figure out,
Yeah, yeah.
like you said, silent strokes.
And we tend to be African descended people all over the world tend not to talk about health. This is something that Dr. Georgia Carnegie Wiley, who's a cardiologist at Washington Hospital Center, when we were doing a program together, she said that whether it's the Caribbean or Africa or African descended people in America, we don't talk about health. We don't know. And she said, if there's any Black women need to know their numbers and they need to know their family history. What's your cholesterol rate? What's your high blood pressure? What's the mental health history of your family, the physical health of your family? Ask those questions. Ask those questions. Many of us are depression and anxiety is the number one mental health issue in America. A society that's as racist, sexist, homophobic, and classist as this produces enormous levels of stress.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was teaching at several white colleges, I would be teaching these graduate students who were like in their 30s, in these MFA programs. Half of them were on Prozac. And these were white people who were privileged because of their race, often privileged because of their class. Half the class was on Prozac.
Yes.
So they were stressed out for different reasons. Okay. So that you combine that with systemic racism. And we're a society that is generating off the chart levels of anxiety and stress. So if you're not practicing these practices, you're conspiring with systemic racism.
Just failing to connect the dots through family is something that's amazing to me. Because when I look back, I realized, after like the whole generation of my mother and her sisters is no longer here, realizing that they all had cardiac issues. They were all heart-related issues or some kind of heart health issue that they shared that eventually took them away from here. Even my mother suffered from complications, I believe, from hypertension for having it for so long that eventually when she got sick, she fell, bumped her head, had a brain bleed, and because she was on warfarin, she was in that position where if they took her off the warfarin, her blood would clot and she'd have problems that way.
Right.
If she stayed on it, then she would continue to bleed. So it was just like my mother, my aunts, my grandmother. So we really do need to connect those dots for the future.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
Let's go to another a question, and I have it written, so I want with respective prose, tone, and unique storytelling. You provide examples of when it might be appropriate to resist certain emotions or vulnerabilities. But you also discuss how we must dismantle the myth of being a strong Black woman for the sake of our physical and mental health, as everything we're talking about. How did you, as I was reading the book, how did you approach balancing those two related but very distinct messages? Because your presentation is still gentle, it's still
elegant.
Well, after I went to the doctor and found out that I'd had those 2 strokes, even though they were silent strokes, the MRI revealed that they had happened sometime really far back, but I had lost brain cells. So I had erected this image of myself because I was doing so many things right as a super healthy, strong Black woman. So the idea that I had had 2 silent strokes was absolutely unacceptable. It was absolutely unacceptable to my image of myself.
Yes.
Now that's a problem right there, because why should that be unacceptable? I mean, I'm a human being. I have that in my genetic pool. It doesn't diminish me in any way. I just had 2 silent strokes,
Right.
and I survived. But I left the doctor's office completely, in some ways, shattered. So I went home, and as I want to do, started reading. And I saw that there's a very vibrant conversation on the internet and in magazines, journals around Black health. Remember now, this was after George Floyd. We were moving, so that topic was really being pushed out there.
Yeah.
So that combined with my hyper concern about my health,
Exactly.
I said, okay, I said, there's a story here somewhere. I said, there's a story here somewhere. And it started with me dismantling this belief that I couldn't, Marita Golden, I couldn't dare have a silent stroke, not with all I'd done.
Yes.
And I learned through writing the book that health, whether it's mental or if it's, is a journey. It's not a destination. I mean, I have started, in addition to everything else I did, I started hiking. I have a small group of women that once a month I hike with, which is really new and interesting. And I started meditating longer in the morning so that as I age, the practices I already have in place are enhanced.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to wrestle with my image that, oh, I'm so strong and you've got to be strong, you know, and that's so unrealistic. And in terms of writing the book, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a doctor, but I'm a storyteller. I'm a Black woman, and I have written numerous memoirs where I've used my experience to examine the color complex, or to examine, you know, raising our sons against the background of so much violence. And so I sort of had a template, what I call the communal memoir. And so I said, okay, I'll start with my story, and then I'll see where this takes me. And as I was writing, you know, I came across all these negative statistics around Black women's health that are very real. Mm-hmm. But I did not want it to be a book that was only about the challenges. I wanted it to be an inspiring book. So I had to figure out how to write about our health challenges and inspire people. And one of the things that inspires people is other people talking about how they've overcome obstacles, like the women who talk about going into therapy. What inspires people is stories. And I thought about how I'm a writer and a reader, and how stories are healing. And that's why the book actually ends with the essay about Their Eyes Are Watching God, which is a powerfully healing text. So I said, oh God, I can't just write, you know, Black women are twice as likely to die, Black women, you know, I've got to, provide hope here.
It's an incredible sort of the way that you've wound it, or just everything is just intertwined. It made it really comfortable to read those words that are basically saying to us, stop, do things differently in your life, but in a very, I understand what you're saying. You are a Black woman. You have experiences. You also have interviewed, and you had somewhat of and it was a humbling experience as well. And perhaps it made it easier, you know, to communicate the need for us to stop in the way that you did. But there's a huge stop. So I'm surprised on the corner and on the book.
There's not a huge
stop sign.
You know, and the most difficult chapter for me to write was the chapter about the things we carry and how Black women carry weight, because we're living in an age when a lot of very important conversations that we need to have been labeled shaming.
Yes.
And I had several women read that chapter to make sure that I was being sensitive. But in the end, I realized that this was my book. And I had to stand on my belief that we need to be honest about obesity, that we're strong. We can take a conversation about how excess weight is killing us. So I balanced, sensitivity, but also I had to stand for something. I had to write something that people would remember.
You did.
You
Can you also
definitely did.
mention that? And I just want to say, you talk about, it's easy for us to exchange when we're having difficulties or challenges in our lives. Oh, this is, this has been hard for me, but we should just as easily be able to communicate, talk about our health. I know Cheryl and I talk about, yeah, I'm taking this medication now and blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it was so good to hear the women who had gone through therapy say that, like one of them said, I went into therapy and then I started talking about it among my friends. And they would come up to me, like, if you're out to dinner,
Yeah.
and then you go into the ladies' room. And then one of them would follow her in the ladies' room and say, I'm so glad you shared that about therapy. I kind of wanted to do that myself, and now I know what it's like. So, and I think it's really important to keep having that conversation. One of the women in the book, Sarah, who had grown up in a deeply traumatic racial environment in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, and basically suffered with post-traumatic stress because of that. She went into therapy and she learned the skills to support her healing. She's a very close friend. And about maybe a year and a half ago, or maybe less, I saw her and I said to her, you don't look good. Your energy's off, your vitality's off. When I read your writing, there's so much power there. I'm not getting that power from you. I don't know what's wrong, but something's off. So she sent me an email a couple of months later and thanked me. And she said, what you were talking about is the fact that I had hurt my back, that I was now, thanks to the lockdown, a woman who was homeschooling her son while being in a PhD program. And the stress of all that was sapping me. And so she got back into therapy. She went in essentially for a tune-up. And that's how we maintain our mental health. And I think it's important for us to be able to say to our sister friends, what's wrong? You're not looking good.
That's right.
Now, maybe because I'm the age I am, I have the right. I give myself
You're
the right
free
to
to do that. Yeah.
But I think it's really important to say that. And I talk in the book about how one of my oldest friends for many years was overweight.
Yep.
And I didn't know how to talk to her about it. And I would try to drop these hints. Oh, I'm going to the gym today. Oh, Joe and I are going to the gym. Nothing. And she went to give blood and they wouldn't take her blood donation because her blood pressure was so high that they had to take her to the emergency room. Now, she lived in New York City, which meant that she was walking a lot. Now, the fact that she was walking a lot meant that even though she was near stroke, she hadn't yet had a stroke. So that was a huge wake-up call for her, huge. But today, I would find a way. I would talk about health. I just have a do Jesus, look, sister, we're both at this age.
All right.
When was your and you have to be willing. So what, people gonna get mad with you?
That's
So
right.
what, people would say, that's not it. Well, it is my business.
Yeah, it is.
If I'm your girlfriend, it's my business.
I love you. Yeah.
So you can get mad with me, go on and get mad, but I cannot rest if I have not asked you, when was your last checkup? I cannot do that anymore. I cannot do that anymore.
I can't leave you be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Wow.
so you'll be mad with me. You'll probably be mad with me, and then you'll call the doctor.
That's right.
Yes, at least it got you to do the right
So
thing.
mission
Yeah.
accomplished.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I want to ask, I have a couple more questions. I know we're running up on time, but about relationship. So you talked about being a wanted child and safety and protection and feeling that. And everybody wants that, to feel wanted and protected and feel safe, even in our adult life. You discuss love and relationships freely across many of your books. How do you, how do the ways that we seek love and safety and protection through our personal and intimate relationships play into the strong Black woman syndrome?
Well, the strong Black woman complex, oh God, it has such a negative, the traditional definition of it has such a negative impact, because
Mhm.
one of the reasons so many Black women stay in difficult relationships is because being a caretaker or being a fixer for a man who is broken provides enormous self-esteem. It boosts your idea that you can handle anything, you can fix anything, you're going to make you a man. But at the same time,
Yeah.
it diminishes your ability to care for yourself. It impacts our relationships with family, in that, I'll give an example. My husband, many, many years ago, had cancer, and he survived. And it was, as you can imagine, a very difficult time. I was his primary caretaker. He did get support from the rest of the family, but who didn't get support was me. And so the family members would call up every day. How's Joe? First thing, how's Joe? How's Joe? And I was feeling very isolated, very alone, very overwhelmed. And I just called my mother-in-law, who loves me. Yet I was the greatest thing since sliced bread in her estimation. I said, Ma, y'all don't never ask about me. I'm the main caretaker, and nobody cares about me. Nobody asks how I'm doing.
Right.
And from that day forward, it was fixed. It
Yeah.
was fixed. How are you, Marita? What can we do for you? Do you need anything? So if I had not told them
That's right.
that they were letting me down, they would not have known that.
Yes.
And so by giving our children or people in the family the idea that we can solve all their problems with a family ATM, the family minister, the family therapist, it corrupts their concept of themselves and us. It weakens them, it diminishes them, and it does the same thing to us.
Interestingly, when I was working for this firm, years ago, and I was having some challenges, and I remember speaking to a mentor, and this just ties into what you said. And I said, that this has just become a challenge, blah, blah, blah. And she said, you know what, Janine, if you don't let them know that everything's not okay, they're going to think that everything is okay.
Yeah.
I will never forget it.
Yeah.
And I have held that, for all my career, really. And I'm glad it happened early in my career. Speak up. It's the same thing. Speak up and say what is on our heart, our mind, our health, because it is going to help support someone and inform someone else. Or initiatives, we encourage and aim to empower women to talk and have conversations with their clinicians. And often we give them some talking points. These are things to, sort of broach a particular subject, with your, their healthcare provider. And I want you to know that we feel it is essential for recommended reading. We will be recommending The Strong Black Woman as required reading. Because it serves, as I mentioned earlier, a handbook, and I knew I had it somewhere else, a handbook that may encourage women to open up to their clinicians, but their therapists, family, but most importantly to themselves. So,
thank you. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that, to the workbook and everything else that you have planned. I'm going to use the word amazing because it's appropriate. It's an absolutely amazing work of art, storytelling.
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to applaud the work that you all are doing, because it's very important, very important. And I can see that you're making a difference. And you make a difference one woman at a time, one community at a time.
Yeah.
And I really thank you for supporting my book.
The Strong Black Women, How the Myth Endangers the Physical and Mental Health of Black Women, and other books that are authored and edited by Marita Golden can be purchased as books or downloaded as audiobooks. Please support the author, but do yourself a favor and read to learn more about yourself.